Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Sagacity. Today we have with us Anne Lay from the University College London. Anne has a PhD in cell biology and cancer biology. Anne, welcome to Sagacity.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, not a problem at all. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I just finished some experiments, so I guess I'm ready to participate.
Let's talk a little bit about what your PhD was in and what the purpose of your research was.
So I did my PhD in cancer biology, and the focus was on cancer metastases, so cell migration and invasion and metastases. But at the moment, right now, I'm not working with cancer biology anymore, so I'm sort of move on and do slightly different things. I'm working on how the immune system develop in embryonic development.
What is the bigger goal of your research? What is the purpose of it?
So my research right now is sort of focusing on an emerging field. So it's called mechanobiology. So it's looking at how the physical factors of the tissue, how does that affect cell migration? So we know a lot about the chemicals aspects of that. So like chemokines and molecules that attract cells, but we don't know much about how the physical, like the physical property of the tissue itself. How does that affect these migration? The bigger goal is to try to understand how the immune system is regulated by all these physical forces. So like stretchings or like compressing, things like that.
So by understanding how they affect the immune system, what are we looking for? What is the end?
Yeah. So if you think of the context of disease, for example, during fibrosis or during like cancer, for example, they actually found that the tissues during this process is actually stiffer compared to the tissues compared to normal tissues. So by understanding how these changes, the physical changes in this tissue affecting the immune system, hopefully we would be able to understand how the immune system reacts to cancer or to tumors or to fibrotic tissues. And hopefully we'll be able to develop some therapy in the future to address those questions as well. So yeah, so that is like the bigger goal of this kind of research.
And what would you say is the larger contribution of your research to the society?
I would say first and foremost, because my research is very, very much in terms of basic biology. So usually in biology, we have two sort of branches. We have translational and we have basic research. And my research is falling into that basic science. And I think the most important aspect in terms of my research is more like curiosity driven research. So we try to understand our biological system better, and hopefully that will then inform other people who are doing translational research in terms of like where to look for molecule, for example, or what aspect to target during drug development, things like that. So that is like the main aim of my kind of research. So basic biology questions.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. Let's take a step back and talk about how you got to doing a PhD in this area, cell biology and cancer biology. What was your previous experience in the field?
So I did my undergrad in biochemistry. So actually, I had the best time during my undergrad. I really enjoyed the course, and many of the lecturers who taught me really inspiring people. So they do a lot of like cell biology related research and microscopy, things like that. And that's, I think, in a way influenced my choice of the future topic that I chose for my PhD. And why cancer for my PhD? I think it's because partly my dad is a doctor, so he usually he brought a lot of like medical textbook home, and then I would like, when I was a younger boy, I was like looking through all of them and then just reading them through, and then I thought, oh, this is amazing. And one of the things that I was always wondering, like, oh, how do people treat cancer? Like, this the most devastating disease there is, and I was always curious about that. So after I finished my undergrad in biochemistry, I thought, well, maybe I can apply some of these knowledge in cancer biology. And also a lot of the people who taught me are also cancer biologists themselves as well. So that is sort of like influenced my decisions. And that's how I got into cancer biology for my PhD. And then after my PhD, I wonder like, what else can I do? And I want to sort of diversify my skills a little bit. So that's why I sort of like jump into a slightly different area to just try to like learn a bit more about things that I didn't know little about before, like the immune system, for example. So sort of like diversify my skills a little bit. So yeah. So
Okay, and did you do a master's in between, or did you do your
no, so I didn't do a master. So I just go from undergrad into PhD. Yeah.
And remind us again, which university did you complete your PhD in?
I did my PhD at Cancer Research UK Scotland Institute. So it's in Glasgow, in Scotland. And my undergrad is in Bristol. Yeah.
All right. So do you want to talk a little bit about what the PhD program was like in your university for people who might be interested in applying there for this specific program?
Of course. So I did my PhD in an institute. So the program that we have is directly come from Cancer Research UK. So Cancer Research UK is like, I think the biggest charitable organization for cancer research in the world. So basically they distributing funding throughout the UK. And then when you're applying to the place that you want to apply for your PhD, you're basically applying to that funding coming from CRUK and Cancer Research UK. So that basically what I did. So when I applying for my place, I just looked through the institute website and then just applying for the project listed in that. But if you want to know more about the process, then feel free to ask.
Yeah. So in terms of requirements of getting to that program, what kind of qualifications did they require, and what qualifications did you have already?
Yes. So for Cancer Research UK PhD program, usually you need undergrad degree, of course. You can also have master degree as well. So I know a lot of my friends have master degree as well. In terms of people from the UK, usually the qualification for the bachelor degree is a 2-1. So in the UK we have this system where we rank like first class degree 2-1, 2-2, and so the minimum requirement for the bachelor degree is 2-1 degree to be able to apply for that. Also, it is, I mean, from my personal experience, I would say it is recommended that you have some sort of lab experience depending on what project that you're applying to. So if you're going for a wet lab project, then it is recommend, I think, in my opinion, is that you should have some sort of wet lab skills, that you've done some sort of internship before. Or if you are applying for like a more dry lab project, then maybe you have some programming skills, for example, things like that could really help with your CV as well. So sometimes people like if they want to gain some more experience, they can also go in for a master degree. So like they can do a master in, let's say, bioinformatics, and that would then help them to apply for a PhD in computational biology or something like that. So yeah, so it's really depending on what project that you're applying to. So you can tailor your CV toward that.
And what about publications? Is having publications mandatory, or is it a plus, or is it not really that important to you?
So from my experience, definitely it's not a requirement. It's not essential. I did not have any publication when applying for my PhD. I do know some people who have had like publication before applying for their PhD, but I know a lot of people who don't have any publication and they still be able to apply for this program as well. So I think in general, at least in the UK, publication before PhD is definitely not an essential thing. So the only thing that I think is essential is some lab skills and your enthusiasm.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what the program itself was like? So, for example, in my PhD, I had first couple of years, I had courses, and then we had this exam called the comprehensive exam, which tests students' readiness to go forward with their research. And then we have the defense proposal, and then the defense at last. What was your program like, the structure of it?
Yeah. So I think my PhD program is I think it's applicable to, it's the same to other PhD program within the UK. So in the UK, and the general structure of the PhD program is that you have, you don't have qualification exams. So you just have 4 years, 3 or 4 years PhD. And for my PhD, it's 4 years. And basically for the CRUK PhD program, when you choose a project or when you choose a lab, you stick with that lab throughout your PhD. So you don't change lab, you don't have any kind of rotations or anything. So you start from day one until the end. For some other programs, like for example, the Wellcome Trust PhD program, you have the first year is a rotation year. So you can choose 3 different projects in 3 different labs. And then you work for each of the lab for about three months, and then you can choose which lab to follow up for your PhD. And for CIUK program, you don't have that, so you just go straight from day one till the end of your fourth year. In terms of like activities and courseworks, at least for my programs, they are not mandatory, but you need to get at least 20 credits from your from the coursework that you do. So you can choose from a wide range of different courseworks to do. And because the institute that I worked in, they maintain a connection with the University of Glasgow. So my courses are taught by people at the University of Glasgow. So we would just go there and we do you can choose different coursework, like you can choose programming, you can choose experimental design, things like that. And then throughout the 4 years, you need to have at least 20 credits to be able to graduate. So that is the only requirement for the PhD. The rest of the time, you do a lot of research work in the lab, so like actual experiments.
Okay, wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about funding. When you were applying, did you already have funding when you were entering your PhD program? Did your supervisor provide that for you, or did you have to apply for grants independently?
So in the UK, most of the time, when you're applying for a PhD, usually it's the PI that provide the funding, but then the funding from the PI comes from the organization. So in my case, it comes from CIUK. So CIUK distributing the funding to the PIs, and then PIs advertising the position, and then you apply to those positions. So I don't have to apply for any funding myself. So I just apply to the program. If I get accepted, then that money pot is dedicated to my PhD. Yeah.
Great. We've talked a little bit about what your PhD is in and what the program itself was like, and a little bit about funding and program requirements. Let's talk a little bit about your personal experience. What are some of the difficulties you encountered when you were doing your PhD?
Right. I would say, I mean, yeah, I did have quite a bit of a rough start from my PhD. But I think most people doing PhD, I'm sure they have their own difficulty as well. From my experience, there's two hardest things that I can think of right now. So the first thing was that I have too many choices to go to. So like when you start a project, you discover something interesting that you want to answer, and then it suddenly opened this huge door of all the possibility that you can go through, like all the different paths, and you don't know which path will be the one that you will be able to then graduate or like discover something at the end of it, because there's a lot of possibilities. And I would say from my experience, probably 90% of those were just dead ends. You follow that, and then a few experiments down the road, and you say, oh, there's nothing interesting here, so you have to come back. So that was something that I had to go through, because the topic that I did, I was trying to investigating this new proteins that people have not researched about. So I have just too many choices for me to go. But it's also scary because I don't know which one is the right choice. So that's what difficult for me to choose. And that's why you have an advisor who guide you through that process. And based on their experience, they can say, oh, maybe this will be more likely to be successful, and this will be less likely to be successful. So that is also why an advisor is important. The other difficult things that I'd say, and I think it probably quite a sensitive topic, is lab politics. So I was not aware of the lot of lab politics behind the scenes, because to me, when I started my PhD, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do science, I'm going to focus on doing my experiments, and then I'm going to graduate. When you actually started your PhD, you have to interact with a lot of people, and different people have different personalities and different stories as well, different backgrounds, and sometimes it can lead into complication in communications or things like that in the lab, and which is something that I'm not aware of before. But I mean, I guess I learned from my experience. So I'm still here. So so that was so that was quite an experience for me, lab politics, and also the choices that you have during your PhD. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve when it comes to the personal experience that you have with going through the PhD. I mean, I can tell you stories about my experience, but let's focus on you today. The next question I have is, actually, I have a follow-up question about how you had so many options to focus on, and you kind of had to test out theories and go back to the first step because things didn't work out. So when you say there was nothing interesting when you were pursuing one path, were you looking for a breakthrough finding? Let's say you found a negative result or you didn't find anything. Would you still write about that and publish a paper in social sciences or like in public health? And in my field, we would still publish the negatives that we find.
Okay.
We wouldn't look for a positive result. So what was that similar, or if something didn't work out, you just forgot about it and looked for something?
So I think this is come down to the differences between the fields. So at least from my experience in at least in biomedical science and in my field, there is this, I would say, toxic is a strong word, but I would have to say it's sort of like the trend where people would only publish positive results and ignoring, the negative results. I personally think that negative results are results if they are done correctly, if the experiment was planned correctly and the result is not an artifact, like it's not something that, could be a million things. Then I think that's definitely something that people should publish. Obviously, from my experience, I do have a lot of a negative result as well. You do one experiment and you didn't quite find something, and then you say, well, what's the point of doing this? And I think one of the reasons why people don't keep continuing doing that down that path is because of the time constraints. If there is no time constraint, or if there is less of a time constraint, I'm sure that people would then, go down that path and trying to resolve that problem. But from my experience, I think time is quite an essential thing during PhD. At least in the UK, you only have 3 to 4 years, which is quite short comparing to, for example, in the US, you can have as long as 8 years of PhD. So I think that is also one of the kind of the pressure that a lot of the PhD students have as well. So for me personally, I think if you have negative results and if it is properly controlled, the experiment design is well controlled, absolutely publish that, because I think people would benefit a lot from learning those negative results. So I think that's absolutely wonderful if people do that.
And can that be your PhD thesis, even though it was a negative result?
Yes, absolutely. You can. That can be your PhD thesis as well. So at least I know a few people who, they don't have negative result, but that is they've still done the work, and they put a lot of effort in it. And I think it is only right to agree that they deserve the PhD because they put in a lot of work, a lot of time. They've done the research, and even if it's negative, that will still be useful for somebody else follow that path and say, okay, this area is negative. There's nothing here. So we can avoid that. We can go to the other path.
Not to repeat the same experiments, for example.
Yeah. So you don't waste too much, resources doing the exact same thing and then you find nothing. So yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that information and also your personal experience in the lab. What are some of the positive experiences of your PhD?
Yeah, I mean, so my PhD, so as I mentioned before, so my PhD was a bit rough at the beginning. Actually, my very first project, it was scooped by somebody else unintentionally, because in science, you share a lot of ideas and, people can have the same idea as well. Mm-hmm. So I lost about 2 years of my research, so a year and a half of my research at the beginning. But then toward the end of my PhD, it's actually significantly going up in terms of my sort of emotion during my PhD. And I enjoy the process of working with the unknown. So because my PhD was to try to understand this protein that nobody has studied before. And, there's a lot of room to explore. So I enjoy the process of trying to do basically detective work, trying to work out, okay, where this protein inside the cell, what does it actually do? What clues do we have before based on the structure of the protein or based on the literature that's maybe some other have done some sort of screening that maybe that protein popped up. And then you just sort of put the things together and then try to connect the dots and then trying to like understand. So I enjoyed that process a lot. So we did this tagging of the protein. So we attach this protein to a fluorescent molecules and then we add that to the cell and then we just follow that. And then I remember the first time I saw the localization, so like the position of that protein inside the cell is at the plasma membrane where the cell intake in substances from the outside. I thought that was amazing. That was the first time that I saw the localization of the protein, and I was just like, oh my God, I need to show my boss. And then I show her, and then we're just discussing, and then we was like, oh, this is so cool. You can see the dynamic of the proteins. And so I remember that moment, and that's probably one of the highlights of my PhD. Yeah.
Okay, wow. I can really see the passion in you. That's really nice to see. I mean, you have to enjoy what you're doing, right? Especially when you're signing up for a PhD. If the work is not very exciting, or if you don't find it exciting, it's going to be a little tough.
It can be quite tough, yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you, in terms of, this can be either university specific or country specific. What are some of the challenges that you think should be resolved within your specific university that you did the PhD in, or within the UK, that could help PhD students in the future?
Oh, I mean, I think at least like when I was applying for my PhD at the time, so that was probably like 7 years ago now. So during that time, there was actually not that many PhD projects that can fund international students. So actually, I'm not from the UK, so I'm from Vietnam, and I moved to the UK in 2012. And so a lot of the fundings, they don't actually fund international students. So if you're applying for the PhD program, you have to pay to be able to do the PhD. Some people can do that, but a lot of the student cannot do that because it's quite a lot of money. And at the time, I find it is quite difficult to know which PhD program would fund international student and which one don't fund international student. And that took me a lot of time to try to do research and then asking professors, people in my school, people at the institute that I applied to, like, is this, do they fund international students? So I found that quite difficult at the time. However, I believe that from that point until now, I think a lot has changed. I think nowadays there's more fundings for international students now, at least in the UK, compared to before. So I think that's quite good because that means that you can start attracting people from, outside of the UK. And then when they come to the UK, they can start doing all these exciting science. And maybe if there is like some sort of a collection or like a website where you will list all of the funding where they specifically saying this funding can be fund for international students, that will be very helpful. I don't think there is one yet, not that I'm aware of. So I think that will be very useful. Maybe just stating, is it just home student only, or is it international student plus home student? So yeah, so I think that could be quite useful.
That would be a wonderful initiative for universities to focus on. Actually, makes life a lot easier rather than applying or emailing every professor and asking their program funds international students. Okay, great. I wanted to go back to your research topic. What are some existing gaps in your research area? Now, I know this, given your topic, there can be multiple gaps that one can fill. But if you can talk about one or two that future PhD students may choose to work on in the next 3 to 5 years, if they choose to complete a PhD in the field that you're working in, that would be great.
Right. I would say, I mean, given on the great development in artificial intelligence and, AIs and machine learning, I mean, definitely there is a lot of opportunities in that area. So a lot of the students can sort of combining their computational skills with biology. So I think this is the future. So computer plus biology. Because traditionally biologists, so we do a lot of work manually, so experimentally, and then analyzing the data manually. So it's very time consuming. But nowadays, like there was this shift toward using, machine learnings and artificial intelligence to help us to analyze the data more efficiently and more reproducibly. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for people to develop more tools that help biologists, that help scientists to do all of this work much more efficiently. So I think that is also one of the direction that I've seen. And also there's a shift in sort of like combining different sciences with biology as well, at least in my field. So we combine a lot of physics and again computational and mathematics into biology as well. So I think that is also very exciting. So interdisciplinary research, I think that is the future, at least in biology. That's that's what I think.
Wonderful. I have a most frequently asked question that I would like to hear your answer to. How do you maintain a balance as a PhD student?
I think that is a lot of people have asked me these questions as well. I personally have to say I'm not the best person in terms of maintaining a balanced life. So I do stay in the lab quite late. I do admit that that's not very healthy, but I actually quite enjoy being in the lab. So that's sort of like not so bad for me. I don't feel too bad by myself. But definitely, I think, for many other who wants to have a more balanced life, I think having a hobby helps a lot. I'm trying to find a hobby that I can do. I try drawing. I try taking pictures. I try, making an illustration. Still not found a good hobby that I can actually stick with. Which is very sad because, I want to have a hobby. I want to I do this in my free time. I just don't. I just stay in the lab, doing experiments and, reading papers and stuff like that, which, to many other probably quite boring. I quite enjoying it, just doing, random things in the lab and reading some papers from time to time. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. But for others, definitely trying to, explore a bit more options and trying to find the hobbies that you really enjoy doing. And I think that helps, take your mind off work quite well, I think.
My next question is, what is one PhD myth that you would like to debunk today?
Oh, I thought about this before. Let me just collect my thoughts. A myth, I would say intelligence. So personally, people saying that, oh, you do a PhD, you must be very smart. I personally don't think so. I think doing a PhD is a lot about being persistent. You think about a problem a lot of the time, like throughout the day, trying to figure it out, how to solve that problem. And I mean, there is certain requirement in terms of you have a basic understanding of things and a certain ability to do things. But I think the majority of someone who'll be able to complete a PhD is being persistent, being curious and being enthusiastic about it and persistent. Like keep working on the same problems and keep thinking about that and try different things, try a million things, doing many different experiments, trying to test something. So I think that is something that most people don't know. I mean, at least people outside PhD and your academia don't know, is that doing a PhD is mostly about being persistent, not so much about how smart you are. So that's just my opinion. So I think, yeah.
What is one advice you would give to future and current PhD students?
I think at least this one is based on my personal experience, is that you should talk to people. So I am, like when you mentioned before, doing a PhD probably is the hardest thing for me. I've never done anything as hard as doing a PhD. And there's, time where I just I cannot do this. I'm just going to quit because this is just not working out. And, there's a lot of things, I cry a lot during my PhD, just from, the pressures and the stress. And most of the time, it's just me putting myself through those stress, right? But then also you have, the time constraints and, the worry about the futures. So I was quite stressed during my PhD, especially during the first two and a half years of my PhD. So, and what I found that helps me a lot is to be able to talk to someone who actually gone through the same thing that I did. And I found that really, really helpful for me. There was this person in the lab next door to the lab that I used to work in. And she's also went through the exact same thing. So, her project didn't work out at the beginning and then persistent. And then she do the experiments and then she, finished with her PhD with a prize at the end of her PhD as well. So that was really inspiring to me. And, I talked to her and, learn about all of these hardship and all this difficulty that she went through. And then I, think to myself, like, if she can do that, so could I, I can do that as well. And that helped me a lot. So I think it's important, for PhD students, all the people out there who want to do PhD, have friends and, make friends and talk to people, share what share your emotions, share your thought. If something didn't work out, talk to people. It helps a lot. At least for me, that really helped me go through to get through my PhD.
Oh, absolutely. I would echo that, actually. I was doing my PhD during COVID-19 and I worked from home a lot. And the main two people I talked to about my PhD was my supervisors, which is, it's all right, but it would have been better if you had friends or people who are doing sort of the same thing, which is also hard to find because no one else is studying my topic. So but I guess when it comes to sharing how you're feeling or any sort of struggles that you're going through, at least that would help, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, personally, like, they don't need to do exactly the same thing as you do. At least, they're doing a PhD. And I'm sure they understand how difficult a PhD is. And I think just that understanding, just that connection that I know, PhD is hard. I've been through this as well. My lab is like this XYZ person. I find that really helpful as well. So yeah, definitely don't limit yourself to, to the people in the same department, or maybe you found someone in your program or in another PhD program that you can talk to. Absolutely. As long as you can talk to each other, as long as you can share, I think that helps.
We're coming to the end of the interview. Is there anything else you would like to share with the audience?
Something that I want to stress again is that imposter syndrome, like people who think that they're not good enough to do PhD, or they're not good enough comparing to other. My advice is that never ever compare yourself to others, because you get a PhD, you get into a PhD program, and just like other people within your program. So personally, I think you are good enough, but also try not to, because you're from a different background. So it's difficult to compare yourself to other people who, have a different background, have a different path to the PhD. So I think just focus on yourself, focus on your PhD, share with other people too, but never compare yourself to other people, because different people have different stories, different paths. It doesn't make sense if you want to compare yourself to others. So just focus on yourself, focus doing your PhD. And I think that's my final advice.
Thank you so much, Anle, for joining us today and sharing your experience with us. I really enjoyed listening to you and your personal experiences. I hope that was helpful to you, our audience, as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for taking the time. You're still in the lab, I can see from the background. Are you going back to work after this?
No, I'm going home after this. So yeah.
Good. Good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for another episode of Sagacity. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.